So hello friends, today we are going to take up local anesthetics. As you all know, local anesthetics, they are one of the very much important component of day-to-day clinical practice. Okay, any minor procedure, any say for example suturing of any wound or any such daycare procedure is to be done. Nowadays, local anesthetics are preferred over general anesthetics. Now, before this lecture, general anesthetics have already been covered, so you are very much aware how general anesthetics trespass the body physiology, how they affect the various systems of our body, and why are local anesthetics so important as they cause minimal physiological trespass, their effect is restricted to a particular area where they are applied and how they are useful. So we'll see in details today about local anesthetics. So first of all, we define what are local anesthetics and what is local anesthesia. So definition, according to which drugs which upon topical application or local injection, they cause a reversible loss of sensory perception, especially pain, in a restricted area of body. Now you can see that the term here is topical application or local injection. That means these drugs need not be given systemically. They are not to be given systemically. Okay. And another terminology which you can see in definition is it causes reversible loss. So once its action is over, then the sensory perception again returns back to normal. Another thing which defines local anesthetics is its effect lasts only in a restricted part of body. Its effect is restricted to a particular selective portion of the body, unlike general anesthesia where whole body is involved whether or not we want or not. So that is the differentiating point between the general anesthetics and the local anesthetics. So how do these drugs act? So they act by blocking generation and conduction of nerve impulses at neurons where they come in contact. So wherever you are instilling the drug, the neurons in with which they come in contact, there these drugs they block the generation and conduction of nerve impulses. Loss, that is whether the loss of sensory perception depends upon the nerve involved. It could be sensory loss, it could be motor loss, or it could be loss of autonomic function to a particular organ. So loss depends upon the type of nerve which is involved. So what is the difference between the general anesthetic and local anesthetic? So we can compare point wise in a table form. I have taken this table from the textbook. Okay, this we will cover it in the next slide. When applied in the vicinity of peripheral nerve ending, that is when you apply local anesthetic in the periphery of a nerve ending or a major nerve trunk, what happens is it inhibits the generation of action potential. So you all know that for a nerve impulse to travel, there has to be generation and propagation of action potential. Now this is basic nerve physiology. Okay, so you all are very much aware of this nerve physiology. So once there is no action potential, so definitely there will be no conduction of impulses right from periphery to the central nervous system. That is the site at which a stimulus is originating the nerve impulse to its conduction right to the central nervous system. All these impulses they are blocked from conduction. Produce transient loss of sensation, motor and autonomic function in a discrete area of the body without producing generalized unconsciousness which occurs in general anesthesia. So this is the table which shows the difference between general and local anesthesia. Again, this I have taken from your textbook only. Site of action, you can see that this is in CNS while local anesthesia is in peripheral nerves. Area of the body involved, in general anesthesia the whole body is involved, while in local anesthesia only a restricted part or where we apply, that is only involved. Vital function care. Now the general anesthetic lecture has been taken. You have studied that many of the physiological systems, including the respiratory, cardiovascular, as well as the central nervous system, all the three important ones, they are highly altered in general anesthesia. So a lot of care has to be provided for these systems. While for local anesthesia, minimum care is needed for these essential physiological functions. Physiological trespass, it is high with general anesthesia while low with local anesthesia. What about poor health patient? That is those with comorbidities, say for example diabetes or asthmatic patient or coronary artery cardiovascular disease patient, hypertensive patients. In them the administering general anesthesia is lot risky. It may lead to complications following the surgery or following the procedure, or it may lead to even worsening of deteriorating of the patient's health. While that particular thing is totally not there with local anesthesia, it is very safe. Use in non-cooperative patient. If the patient is non-cooperative, yes, you can give general anesthesia, but you cannot administer local anesthesia, or with very difficulty you can administer local anesthesia. So in that respect, non-cooperative patient, general anesthesia is to be preferred. Major surgery, yes, if the duration of surgery is long, then definitely there is no other alternative, you have to go for general anesthesia. But for minor surgeries, usually nowadays in clinical practice, general anesthesia is not preferred. Local anesthesia on the other hand is the preferred modality of anesthesia. So moving on, how do we classify drugs? So we classify local anesthetic agents by two means. One is the chemical classification and the second one is the clinical classification. So local anesthetics, clinical, chemical. Clinically, two ways: those that can be injected and those that are applied on surface, that is on the skin and mucous membranes. Injectable, again three types are there. One is low potency and shorter duration, intermediate potency, intermediate duration of action, and high potency and longer duration of action. So they are classified according to their duration of action. Low potency, low duration of action includes procaine and chlorprocaine, while intermediate includes lignocaine and prilocaine, while high potency, longer duration of action includes tetracaine, bupivacaine, ropivacaine and dibucaine. Surface ones: cocaine, lidocaine, tetracaine, benzocaine. Esters, amides. So according to the chemical structure, they are classified as esters or amides. Esters include cocaine, procaine, chlorprocaine, tetracaine, benzocaine, while amides are lignocaine, bupivacaine, ropivacaine, tetracaine and so on. Okay, so it is very easy to remember which one is an ester and which one is an amide. So if you can see that all the amides in their spelling have two I's in their spelling: 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So any chemical, any local anesthetic which in their spelling includes two I's, they are amides, while a single I, they are esters. Esters 1 I, amides 2 I. So that is how you can differentiate between an ester and an amide. So I hope this classification is clear, and you have to remember this classification if at all it is asked in theory examination. So what are the advantages of amides over esters? Three advantages are there. One is they have longer duration of action because esters are hydrolyzed by esterases. So they are not hydrolyzed by plasma esterases, and thus making them longer duration of action or longer acting. Second thing is they have higher affinity for the neuron, so more intense and longer action is produced by amides. And finally, the third is they rarely cause hypersensitivity reaction. Like the hypersensitivity reaction is rarely caused by esters. before going into how these drugs act, I would like to discuss something about fundamentals of impulse generation and transmission. Now, this thing has already been covered in physiology. Okay, so this is the physiology of nerve impulse generation, conduction and transmission. So this forms the basis on how these drugs act. What is the concept behind action of local anesthetics? It is very simple. They prevent conduction and generation of nerve impulses, thereby setting up chemical roadblock between origin of impulse and the part where these impulses are relayed, that is the brain. Okay, the fundamental unit of nerve cell, as we all know, is a neuron. It transmits the message between CNS and all parts of the body. That is, it can bring messages to the CNS as well as it can take messages from CNS to the other parts of the body. Two types are there. Now you all know what are the two types. One is the sensory neurons and the second one are the motor neurons. The third part is also there, and that is the autonomic or the enteric neurons, but majority of them, they are of two types, sensory and motor. So sensory neuron, it transmits all the sensations including the pain sensations. It includes three major processes. There are the peripheral processes which acts as neuroreceptors or nociceptors, okay, pain receptors. Peripheral processes, they are composed of an arborization of free nerve endings in the most distal part of the sensory neuron. From there, axon is there, a cable-like structure which connects these peripheral processes to the cell body of the neuron. And finally, the cell body is located at a distance from the peripheral processes. And it is the function of the cell body to provide nutritional as well as metabolic support to axon and other dendritic peripheral processes. Motor neuron, in comparison to the sensory neuron, transmit nerve impulses from CNS to the periphery, and the cell body is in between the dendrites and the axon. So that is the major difference between sensory and motor neuron. Axon branches, with each branch ending is bulbous axon terminal or a button, axon button, and they synapse with muscle cells at the neuromuscular junction. So you all know this. This is the basic physiology and anatomy of a neuron. So this is a sensory neuron. You can see that free nerve ending, axon and a cell body. These are the dendroids, cell body and axon. Okay. So this is how they are known. So what is the physiology of peripheral nerves? The function of nerve is to carry messages from one part of body to another in the form of electrical stimuli known as impulses. Now these impulses, they are generated by four types of stimuli. It could be chemical, it could be mechanical, it could be thermal, or it could be electrical. What is action potential? It is a transient depolarization of a cell membrane which leads to brief increase in permeability of membrane with delayed increase in permeability to potassium. So this is the nerve action potential. You can see that how long it lasts and how high it goes. Now at this point there is one question, and that is, what is the resting membrane potential of a neuron? So I think everybody be knowing it, and that is minus 70 millivolt inside of the cell membrane. So somewhere here this is minus 70 millivolt and this is the resting membrane potential. Whenever an stimuli, it could be chemical, mechanical, electrical or thermal stimuli, it comes, what happens is there is a change in permeability of the neuron, which leads to generation of some kind of action potential. So whenever these action potential crosses a limit, that is minus 55 millivolt, what happens is there is a spike that is known as depolarization. Okay, so this is whole action potential, this is the refractory period, and this is the repolarization. Now depolarization is due to sodium channels, repolarization is due to potassium channels. So you all know this. So in short, nerve impulses are conducted by a wave of action potential, that is one wave, another wave, and so on. When the stimulus is great enough to reach the threshold potential, this is the threshold potential of minus 55 millivolt, a rapid flow of sodium ion occurs inside the neuron, which leads to a spike which is known as depolarization. When the depolarize, the highest value of the membrane potential is 40 millivolts, plus 40 millivolts. At this point, what happens is the potassium channel starts opening and the up spike, there is outflow of potassium channels. So this up spike again starts coming back to the resting membrane potential. So it gives rise to again minus 70 millivolt, and an action potential has been generated. Now the series of action potential once generated, they propagate, giving rise to an impulse being conducted from the periphery to the center. So this is the physiology of nerve impulse generation and conduction. Nerves possess a resting membrane potential. Okay, this has already been covered, and the inside is minus 70 millivolt, and this is because of differing in concentration of ions at the either side of membrane. Internal is negative in respect to the outer part. Step 1, stimulation excites the nerve cell. So there is initial slow depolarization, and you all know this. Okay, if it reaches a critical level, that is if it reaches a threshold potential, then there is a depolarization occurs, the firing potential is achieved, and the internal it becomes plus 40 millivolt. Internal potential is plus 40 millivolt. Step 2, repolarization phase. It becomes negative gradually due to outflow of potassium ions, and until it reaches this resting membrane phase. So step 1 lasts for about 0.3 millisecond, while step 2 lasts for about 0.7 millisecond. Okay. So if you have to see it in a figure, this is how it is seen. We have an animation to see it. So this is our voltage gated sodium channel, VG, voltage gated. Okay. This is our membrane, the cell membrane of a neuron. Okay, or it could be its peripheral process, but that is the cell membrane. Now you can see that inside it is negative, minus 70 millivolt. At resting state it is closed. Any impulse, it could be thermal, electrical, chemical or mechanical. What happens? The gate is open and the pattern changes from resting to open. So there will be movement of sodium from outside the neuron to inside. So sodium moves inside the cell. So what happens to this resting membrane potential? It will turn into positive, from negative 70 to plus 40 millivolts. Now what happens? This gate closes. So now the channel changes to inactive state. Okay. So basically there are three states of voltage gated sodium channel: closed, open, inactivated. In both the closed as well as inactivated states, sodium cannot enter inside the cell. Okay. Only in the open state the sodium can enter inside the state. Now this inactivated state, which we clinically say as the refractory phase. Okay, it is due to this inactive state the refractory state occurs. What is this inactive state for? It requires some time for the channels to again come back to the closed state. So now they are again ready for another impulse opening and conducting sodium inside the cell. So where in this picture our local anesthetic agent comes? So we will see that. Okay, this is our local anesthetic agent, BH. Okay, in its unionized form, it crosses the cell membrane, it enters inside the cell, again ionizes, it binds to this inactivated state. Okay, it binds to this inactivated state. The local anesthetic binds to the inactivated state. So now you can see that no impulse can lead to entry of sodium inside the cell. So no generation of action potential, no propagation or conduction of this action potential from periphery to the center. Local anesthetic prolongs inactivated state of sodium channel, voltage gated sodium channel. Hence, it does not allow generation and propagation of nerve impulses. How does it act? Very simple. Local anesthetics block the voltage gated sodium channels. No entry of sodium ions inside the cell. No depolarization. No generation of action potential. No generation and conduction of these impulse to the CNS. Local anesthesia is achieved. So what are the actions of local anesthetic agents? Two types of actions, local and systemic. Local means at the site where the drugs are applied. The order of block depends on the type of fiber. Three types of nerve fibers are there, A, B and C. C fibers are the first to be affected, followed by B, followed by A. Then the system of blockade, sensory greater than autonomic greater than sensory greater than motor. That is, autonomic fibers are blocked first, sensory then, and then motor. In sensory also, the order of block includes pain, temperature, touch and pressure. So first the pain stimuli will go, then temperature, then touch and pressure. Always remember the fibers or the system that is blocked first, those are the last to recover. That is, if the sensation of pain goes first, it will be the last to recover after the effect of local anesthetic is over. Local anesthetics are less effective in inflamed tissues. The reason is simple. In inflamed tissue, there is a lot of blood flow, there is a lot of vasodilatation. So whenever there is vasodilatation, it will rapidly remove local anesthetic from its site of action and thus decreasing its efficacy as well as its duration of action. Systemic effects of local anesthetics mainly on CNS and CVS. Okay, first we will see this. What happens when we give local anesthetic with vasoconstrictor? Say for example an adrenaline. This you have studied in ANS, that is what is the pharmacological basis of combining adrenaline with a local anesthetic agent. So there are a few advantages. One is it prolongs the duration of action of local anesthetic. Why? Because vasoconstriction leads to decreased blood flow to the area. So decrease wash away of the local anesthetic from its site of action. It reduces the systemic toxicity. The amount of local anesthetic entering the systemic circulation is decreased and thus the systemic toxicity is also decreased. And finally, because of vasoconstriction, there is less blood in the surgical field, so provides a bloodless field of surgery. And there is one disadvantage. Because there is less blood flow to the area, so there is chances of local edema, local necrosis and delayed wound healing following surgery. Second disadvantage is that whatever vasoconstrictor agent you have given, it may enter the systemic circulation, giving rise to its own toxicity. Say for example, with adrenaline it can lead to hypertension, arrhythmia and so on. So systemic toxicity can. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of combining adrenaline with a local anesthetic. Systemic actions mainly on CNS and CVS. CNS, it includes stimulation So initial stimulation of the central nervous system followed by its depression. Now this usually happens when local anesthetic is injected accidentally directly into the bloodstream. Okay, otherwise usually this toxicity is not seen. CVS, some local anesthetics are cardiac depressants, particularly bupivacaine. Okay, it may induce some arrhythmias. Okay, lignocaine is used in the treatment of arrhythmias. It is an anti-arrhythmic drug. Finally, blood pressure. It causes vasodilatation because there is vasodilatory effect and it leads to fall in blood pressure. What are the adverse drug reactions of local anesthetics? Systemic toxicity depends upon the entry of drug into circulation. So again, these side effects are seen only when accidentally you pierce a blood vessel and directly it goes into circulation, or if a very large dose of local anesthetic is given. But otherwise, if careful dose and with careful administration technique, usually systemic side effects are not seen. Okay. CNS stimulation followed by depression. In CVS, there will be hypotension, there will be bradycardia, there will be arrhythmias, okay, and it can lead to collapse as well. Local, so wherever you are administering the drug, it can lead to pain because of the administration technique. So there will be injection site pain, there will be necrosis, there will be delayed wound healing. Okay. Vasoconstrictors like adrenaline should not be used at sites where there are end arteries. Now you all know what are end arteries. That is the arteries with no branches. The sites are hand, feet, fingers, toes, pinna and penis. These are the 6 sites where you should not use a local anesthetic along with a vasoconstrictor. You can use the local anesthetic only alone. No vasoconstrictor is required. So last part is some methods or techniques of local anesthesia. 6 techniques are there. Surface anesthesia, using ointment, drop, jelly, sprays. Then you have infiltration, where you inject the drug, local anesthetic drug, directly under the skin without taking any the course of anatomical course of nerve into consideration. Okay, so directly nerve endings are blocked. Then comes the conduction block, where LAs are injected, that is the local anesthetics are injected around the nerve trunk. It is of 2 types, field block and nerve block. Then comes the spinal anesthesia. Here the drug is injected in the subarachnoid space. And finally epidural anesthesia. Here the drug is injected in the epidural space. So first, surface anesthesia. Now this technique you must have seen, majority of you must have seen when you have gone for the wards. If you have gone in the wards, clinical wards, you have seen this surface anesthesia technique. Anesthesia is obtained by applying a local anesthetic drug either to the skin or mucous membrane. Okay. EMLA. Now you have to find out, this is your you can say homework. This you have to find out what is EMLA skin cream, lignocaine and prilocaine, and what is EMLA. Okay, what is the full form of it? It is given in your textbook, so you just have to find out what is it. Okay. It is used to anesthetize intact skin, particularly when we are doing venipuncture, that is when we are inserting a cannula for IV drip or IV injection. There, to do it pain free, that is to do it without feeling any pain, we can use this skin cream. Mucous membranes, say for example mouth, nose, or the urethral mucous membrane, rectal mucous membrane, it can easily be anesthetized by using lozenges, jellies, sprays, drops, etc. So for what purposes we use this surface anesthesia? It is used for the purpose of catheterization, urinary catheterization. You must have seen, all of you must have seen insertion of a urinary Foley's catheter. Okay, majority of you must have seen. So if you have seen the technique, you must be aware that prior to catheterization of urethra, a lignocaine jelly is inserted in the urethra, following which catheter is inserted. Or you must have seen Ryle's tube insertion, cystoscopy, endoscopy, etc. So this is a technique where endoscopy is going to be done. Before that, the posterior pharyngeal wall is anesthetized using a lignocaine spray. Next is the infiltration anesthesia. Again, if you have seen the process of suturing of wounds, you all must be aware of this. Here what we do is we inject the local anesthesia directly around the wound, so that the area of the wound is totally and completely anesthetized and easily suturing of the wound can be done. Here we do not take any consideration of which nerve is there, where is the course of that nerve, nothing doing. Only the pain receptors of that particular area are locally anesthetized by injecting the drug directly in the under the skin. So drugs used for infiltration anesthesia, lignocaine mostly, sometimes bupivacaine can be used. Procedures which can be done by infiltration anesthesia is minor procedures like incision and drainage of an abscess, removal of a small cyst or small swellings like lipoma, etc. can be done, and suturing of wounds can be done by this technique. So this is the wound, okay, and you can see that around the wound we are injecting the local anesthetic, infiltrating it, and finally once the effect comes we can suture this wound. Next part is the conduction block. Here what we do is we inject the local anesthetic around a nerve trunk or around the anatomical course of a nerve, and the area distal to the nerve, area distal to this infiltration site is blocked. It is anesthetized and it is paralyzed. Drug use mainly lignocaine, rarely bupivacaine is used. Two types are there. One is field block and the second one is nerve block. In field block what we do is, here the drug is injected in close proximity to a large terminal branch of a nerve, so a large area is anesthetized. It is used for hernia repair, then you have used it for scalp stitching, dental procedures, operations on forearm and legs, etc. So I have taken here example of dental procedure. You can see that when you inject drug here, almost all of this area which is supplied by this branch will be anesthetized. So you are injecting drug here, but this whole area will be anesthetized. So infiltration site is somewhere else. The anesthetized portion is distal to this infiltration site. Next is nerve block. So you identify the course of a nerve, okay, anatomical course of a nerve or a nerve plexus, and you administer your drug around that area. So the whole area which is supplied by the nerve will be anesthetized and the whole portion will be paralyzed if it contains some motor fibers as well. Blocks performed by this technique include the femoral block, ulnar block, brachial plexus block, sciatic block, etc. Out of this brachial plexus block is commonly done for procedures, the orthopedic procedures or any other surgical procedures which involve the upper limb. So this is a image of brachial plexus. You can see that various sites where you can inject the drug and various type of anesthesia will be produced. Next is spinal anesthesia. The most common form of local anesthetic technique used in day-to-day clinical practice is spinal anesthesia. It is used for what? So for below umbilicus procedures, any procedures which are performed below the level of umbilicus can be done under spinal anesthesia if the procedure is around about 1 to 2 hours long. So procedures involving lower limbs, procedure involving lower abdomen and perineum, it can be done using this technique. Drugs used for this technique include lignocaine mainly, sometimes bupivacaine. Site of action or site of injection, the drug is injected in the subarachnoid space in L2, L3 or L3, L4 vertebra. Site of action is in the nerve roots present in the cauda equina. Level of anesthesia attained depends upon the volume and speed of with which the drug is injected, specific gravity of the solution and posture of the patient. Okay, you need not go into details with this because only basic knowledge of spinal anesthesia has to be known. Level of block, yes, the highest will be the sympathetic, then sensory below it, and motor below it. Duration depends upon the drug used. If the lignocaine is used, then it is about 30 to 60 minutes. If bupivacaine is used, it is about 90 to 180 minutes. What are the advantages of spinal anesthesia over general anesthesia? It is very safe to administer. It produces good analgesia and muscle relaxation without producing unconsciousness. Cardiac, pulmonary, renal and diabetes do not pose any major problem with this technique, which is a very big problem when we are giving general anesthesia. Complications, yes, there are few, some which very commonly occur, some very rarely occur, but you have to be prepared when you are giving spinal anesthesia. So some of which is respiratory center paralysis. This with proper care, this is the least likely. It occurs due to ischemia of, it occurs due to paralysis of intercostal muscles if a high spinal anesthesia is given, and it can lead to paralysis of intercostal muscles. Also, it can lead to hypotension caused by many things which we will see in the next adverse effect or next complication. Hypotension can lead to ischemia of respiratory center, which can lead to respiratory paralysis. Coughing and expectoration may become difficult, which can lead to pulmonary complications. Hypotension, the most common problem with the use of spinal anesthesia is this hypotension. So what happens is there is paralysis of sympathetic tone of blood vessels, then there is paralysis of lower limb skeletal muscles, so decreases venous return. Both these problems can lead to reduced venous return, reduced cardiac output and decreased blood pressure. How can we prevent it? We can prevent it by preloading the patient with a lot of IV fluids, and if required give some sympathomimetics like mephentermine, ephedrine, etc. Next is Cauda equina syndrome, a rare complication. It is a neurological syndrome which results in prolonged loss of bowel and bladder function control. It occurs due to damage to the nerve roots or chronic arachnoiditis, but this is the least commonly encountered complication of spinal anesthesia. Headache, yes, again this is one of the most common side effects of spinal anesthesia. It occurs because of leakage of CSF from the puncture site where we have inserted needle for injecting the drug. Septic meningitis, yes, if proper aseptic precautions are not taken, then it can give rise to septic meningitis. Infection can be introduced and meninges can be infected. And finally, nausea and vomiting. So this is the technique. You can see that these are the positions for giving spinal anesthesia. Here the needle has been introduced in the subarachnoid space. This can be confirmed whether the needle is in the subarachnoid space once the CSF comes out of this needle. You can see a drop of CSF. Once it comes, you can directly inject the drug slowly into the subarachnoid space. Last is epidural anesthesia. Here the drug is injected into the epidural space which is filled with fat. The drug diffuses along the fat and it acts primarily on the nerve roots. Depending upon the site, epidural anesthesia can be, it could be thoracic, it could be caudal or it could be lumbar. So these are the meninges and this is the epidural space. Here the needle is injected and the drug is injected. So to summarize, local anesthesia is a very useful technique in modern clinical practice. It is used for various procedures with very little complications. Local anesthetics act locally by blocking the sodium channels, the voltage gated sodium channels, and thus they prevent the generation and conduction of nerve impulses. They do not affect the consciousness of the patient. Safe, very little uncomfortable to the patient. Daycare procedures can be easily carried out using this technique. Thank you.